So let's start with defining endpoint protection, and we'll go to all of our favorite source. Um, we're not talking about SQL Server endpoints. Um, and my simple definition of endpoint protection is if it's connected to the network, it's an endpoint, right? So laptops, desktops, phones, tablets, those are the main things that we think about when you talk about endpoint protection or end user devices. And, in the world of BYOD, bring your own device, which a lot of people are wanting to do, this has become a huge topic. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. But this is also servers of all types, right? And so what we have seen is we're going to talk about tools like CrowdStrike. We'll be using CrowdStrike as the example here. They're one of the top players, if not the largest. I know Gartner has CrowdStrike and Microsoft as the leaders in their Magic Quadrant. Um, but there are others, right? There's a whole bunch of them, right? Microsoft has their offering. You've got Sentinel One, and then a lot of the historical antivirus vendors are players in this area too. Like your Sophos is one that comes to mind, right? So, and what's happening is, when I talk to DBAs, a lot of database people feel like this is being forced upon them by info security, right? And we're putting this agent on my server and I don't know what it's doing. And we think it's causing problems. And we know that antivirus, legacy antivirus is what we'll call it, has definitely caused problems over the years with SQL Server. So how do I know this isn't going to? So like a lot of things, there's some resistance in between database people and security. And so we're going to talk about what that is. Also IoT devices, right? And the way that I look at this is, does it have an IP address on your network? It's an endpoint, right? Does it have access to your network? It's an endpoint, right? Is probably the easiest way to describe that. Arthur, is there anything you would add to that in terms of just defining endpoint protection?
No, I think that's terrific, really, and it brings to light the visibility that we don't have in the traditional paradigm too, right? The visibility that's become possible with these new technologies like SIEM and some other things allow us to see, and secure networks in a way that's more holistic and complete, prevents kind of lateral attacks.
Right. On to our favorite authority on all things, Wikipedia, right? This is the Wikipedia definition. Um, Approach to the protection of computer networks that are remotely bridged to client devices. And they go through this list, right? And they talk about how it's evolved since the 2010s away from antivirus into next gen antivirus, threat detection, investigation, and response. And that's one of the most critical pieces here is that this is now an active technology, right? Mature organizations that are doing this right have a SIEM, which is was that security information event management,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
It's tooling, right? Basically, it's for alerting anything that's happening on your network. And there will be a SOC or a security operations center that's actively reviewing those things so that we're catching things as they happen, right? As opposed to kind of the old school way of doing things, which was, oh, a virus was found in the wild. We found out the signature. We update its definition and we start scanning things for it. It's very reactive, right? And this is very active or proactive. CrowdStrike themselves, this is their definition of endpoint security. And there's links to all this stuff, by the way, throughout the deck, and there's a resource slide at the end. One of the things that I found interesting about CrowdStrike, since it is being pushed, to so many SQL servers, is that they specifically don't list servers here, right? What they have listed in their document are really what we classically think of as endpoints. So um, and there's the link to this. This is just a little bit of a screenshot out of a kind of comprehensive document from CrowdStrike. Is this just antivirus? And this is what Arthur alluded to. And I've kind of divided this as the legacy approach, and then we'll talk about the new way of doing things. Legacy approach was, corporate network focused, right? All the devices that are connected to our corporate network across our regions, whatever, which would include, if you connect via VPN, right? But enter the world of SaaS and remote work and so many other things going on. Bring your own device. That doesn't really work anymore. Okay. We remember things like antivirus software, of course, have been around about almost as long as computers. Anti-malware, anti-phishing, right? We can think of lots of these tools that we've had over the years, but they're disconnected tools. They're reactive, and I think probably the biggest difference is that they're not actively being worked, right? Sure, you might have antivirus software that says, hey, here's these quarantine files, but unless there's some overworked sysadmin who's taking the time to go review those, we don't necessarily know about it, right? Which has, in this kind of brave new world, thanks to the breaches and the hackers and everything, organizations now have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and a whole security team and a security operations center, right? That this is not just one of those things that overworked sysadmin has to do. All of these things are still components of the overall stack, right? But the new way of doing things is often referred to as EDR, endpoint detection and response, right? So not only do we want to protect the endpoints, we want to proactively do threat hunting and respond to what is going on, right? We want to find a breach before it becomes a breach, right? We don't want to wait until, NIST identifies this and publishes a CVE and says, "Oh, here's something you need to watch for," right? Proactive versus reactive. Again, SIEM and SOC are probably the two most important pieces of this that particularly smaller organizations are still not doing, right? Maybe they've invested in, the small business CrowdStrike or similar tooling, which is good. But if we're not having these events go to a SIEM, if we don't have a SOC, and then you say, well, how does a small organization afford a SOC? Like everything else, you outsource it, right? There are managed SOC services that there's a whole category of managed services now called MSSPs, which are managed security services providers that do just this, right? So kind of like SSG does managed services for your SQL Server databases, there's this whole category of companies that does security. It's also targeted at a cloud-based or SaaS model, right? Instead of having an appliance that's on our corporate network that all of our corporate endpoints have to be enrolled in and deal with, this lives in the cloud, right? It can be integrated with the SaaS apps that you're interacting with. I like to say that whether you believe it or not, every IT organization in 2024 is hybrid cloud, right? There are some that claim to be cloud only, but I have a hard time. Maybe that if you don't have a domain, okay, you're cloud only, but you still have people on laptops accessing those cloud resources, right? There's something happening that's not in the cloud, right? So these technologies are designed to be cloud based.